In California, haunted house performer Morgan Fowler, known as Trickster the Clown, spent years grooming teenage volunteers before convincing some to abandon school, distance themselves from their families, and live under his control. Investigators said victims were forced to sign contracts and obey strict rules, as Fowler built a cult-like following around himself. Authorities later uncovered evidence that multiple minors had been sexually abused inside a dungeon-like room he had constructed inside his garage. The investigation identified 18 victims, and Fowler was sentenced to 215 years in prison. In 1975, 17-year-old Leslie Whittle was kidnapped from her home in Shropshire by serial killer Donald Nielsen. He blindfolded her, took her to a remote sewer shaft, and chained her by the neck while demanding a 50,000-pound ransom from her family. When the ransom exchange failed, Nielsen abandoned her alone in complete darkness and never returned. Weeks later, rescuers found her body still hanging from the chain. Investigators concluded she eventually died from hypothermia and starvation after being left alone underground. Nielsen was later convicted of her murder and sentenced to life in prison, remaining behind bars until his death in 2011. At 14 years old, Megan Dixon suddenly lost the ability to walk after developing a rare neurological condition in Cambridgeshire, England. Over the following years, her condition worsened so severely that her legs became permanently locked straight and eventually bent backward at unnatural angles, leaving her in constant pain and unable to stand or sit normally. After years of paralysis, seizures, hospitalization, and unsuccessful attempts to reverse the damage, doctors determined her knees were beyond repair. At just 21 years old, she's now preparing to have both legs amputated in hopes of finally regaining some independence and ending the chronic pain that has dominated much of her life. In 2016, heavy rains hit Dhaka, Bangladesh just after Eid al-Adha, an Islamic holiday that commemorates Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his own son in obedience to God. During the celebration, hundreds of thousands of animals were sacrificed across the city. Blood from the animals mixed with floodwater and overflowed into the streets, creating what many people called rivers of blood. Photos of entire roads running red spread across the world and drew criticism from animal rights advocates, who argued that the scale of the slaughter was disturbing and inhumane. Steven Hillenburg, the legendary creator of SpongeBob SquarePants, was a former marine biology teacher who turned his love of ocean life into one of the most successful animated TV shows in history. But in 2017, he revealed he'd been diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, a progressive neurodegenerative disease that slowly destroys the body's ability to move, speak, and eventually breathe. Hillenburg continued working on SpongeBob during his illness before dying in California in 2018 at the young age of 57. The character he created went on to outlive him, becoming one of the most recognizable animated figures in the world. Dutch artist and inventor Bart Jansen became known for turning dead animals into functioning drones after mounting motors and propellers onto taxidermied pets and wildlife. His most famous creation was Orville, a pet cat that was killed by a car and later transformed into a flying drone because Jansen said he wanted to give him a new life. He's also created drone versions of an ostrich, a shark, and several other animals, and later announced plans to build an airborne drone from a dead cow. Jansen says the projects are meant to blur the line between life, death, and technology. This was the horrifying moment a young child was nearly killed by her bus driver when she became trapped after her backpack was caught in the closing door of a Kentucky school bus as she was getting off. The driver then pulled away without noticing, dragging the child alongside the moving bus for hundreds of feet. Luckily, honking bystanders eventually caught the bus driver's attention and she was forced to come to an abrupt stop. The girl suffered serious physical injuries including nerve damage, requiring nearly a dozen surgeries and skin grafts, along with lasting psychological trauma. Court filings noted that she was a special needs student and argued that the bus route, supervision, and safety procedures in place were not appropriate for her needs. The bus driver was removed from duty and later fired, and the school district acknowledged failures in safety oversight. Years later, the child, publicly identified as Allie Rednauer, is back on her feet but continues to deal with ongoing physical and emotional effects and continued medical care. The case ultimately ended with a nearly $5 million settlement, and Allie and her family have since spoken out, pushing for mandatory school bus safety upgrades and warning that without changes, another child could be seriously injured or killed in the same way. In 2024, 24-year-old Clarissa Street died after paramedics reportedly dismissed her as overreacting, despite her repeatedly saying she couldn't breathe and having a long history of dangerous blood clots. At the hospital, a nurse gave her an oxygen mask that wasn't connected to anything, and Clarissa was left deteriorating in a corridor for nearly an hour while suffering from an undiagnosed pulmonary embolism. The inquest later found staff failed to review her medical history, ignored critical warning signs, and treated her for the wrong condition before she suddenly went into cardiac arrest and died. Medical experts later testified she likely would have survived with basic emergency treatment and an earlier diagnosis. For years, rumors circulated that prostitutes who went to a pig farm outside of Vancouver never came back. That's because Canadian serial killer Robert Pickton was murdering them on his property. From the late 1980s to the early 2000s, dozens disappeared after being lured there, where they were killed, dismembered, and fed to the pigs. DNA from multiple victims was later found scattered across the farm, and in 2007, Pickton was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life, though prosecutors argued he killed at least 26 women. According to court records and police testimony, Pickton told an undercover police officer posing as a cellmate that he had killed 49 women and was upset he was caught right before making it to 50. Benjamin Guggenheim was a wealthy American industrialist traveling aboard the Titanic in 1912. As the ship sank, he refused a lifeboat, insisting that women and children go first. He reportedly changed into evening clothes with his valet and prepared to die on board the ship. Before disappearing below deck, Guggenheim is said to have asked a survivor to tell his family that he, quote, played the game straight to the end and that no woman or child was left behind because Ben Guggenheim was a coward. His body was never recovered. This was the moment a Utah driver's life was instantly put in danger. A pickup truck rear-ended the SUV at a railroad crossing, pushing it onto the tracks at the worst time possible. As the crossing arms came down, the driver tried to reverse but got stuck. Footage showed the conductor wailing on the horn and hitting the emergency brakes, but there was no way to stop in time. With the massive train rapidly approaching, the driver had no choice but to abandon the vehicle and run. Moments later, the train slammed into it, instantly destroying the car and causing over $100,000 in damage. Police later cited the pickup truck for following too closely, saying the entire incident began with the rear-end collision. This man was trying to close a metal gate when something went horribly wrong. As he pulled the 2 metal doors together, an electrical fault had apparently energized the gate, electrocuting him immediately. Unable to let go, he remained stuck to the gate as electricity coursed through his body. Luckily, his coworker realized what was happening and quickly drop-kicked him away from the gate, instead of grabbing him directly, which could have gotten them both electrocuted. Amazingly, the man survived. If his friend hesitated for even a few more seconds or approached the situation any differently, the outcome most likely would have been much worse. This eerie burial suit from China's Liao dynasty was made between the 10th and 11th centuries, using woven silver wire, a bronze mask, and a metal crown to encase the dead. Elite members of the dynasty were sometimes buried in elaborate metal suits like this, because it was believed they could help preserve the body and protect the soul in the afterlife. A 700-year-old statue of the Hindu god Ganesha sits perched on top of Indonesia's active Mount Bromo volcano, where it has overlooked smoke, ash, and eruptions for centuries, as part of a sacred ancient site used by local Tenggerese worshippers. In 2024, researchers using LiDAR scans in Ecuador's Upano Valley revealed the hidden remains of a massive 2,500-year-old civilization buried beneath the Amazon rainforest, including huge networks of roads, plazas, homes, and agricultural structures that had remained completely concealed under dense jungle for centuries. Archaeologists say the site is so enormous that only a small portion has been studied so far, and future excavations could uncover far more about the lost civilization and how millions of people may have once lived deep within the Amazon. This teenage boy uncovered his father's darkest secret, and it cost him his life. In November of 2012, 13-year-old Dylan Redwine vanished during a court-ordered Thanksgiving visit with his father Mark in the mountains of Colorado. From the start, Mark claimed Dylan simply ran away, but investigators grew suspicious when they found the boy's blood splattered across the living room floor and furniture, with cadaver dogs alerting to the scent of human decomposition inside the home and in Mark's truck. Still, without a body, police couldn't arrest him. As the case gained national attention, Mark even appeared on Dr. Phil in 2013, sitting beside his ex-wife and older son to plead his innocence on live TV. But the disturbing truth began to unravel in 2015, when hikers discovered Dylan's partial remains scattered across the woods, while his skull was found miles away with multiple fractures from blunt force trauma. The motive that eventually emerged was almost too grotesque to believe. Dylan had found humiliating photos of his father dressed in women's lingerie and eating feces from a diaper, and told friends he planned to confront him about it. Investigators believe that confrontation happened the night he arrived for Thanksgiving, ending with Dylan being beaten to death, his body dumped in the mountains to hide the evidence. In 2021, nearly a decade after his son went missing, Mark Redwine was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 48 years in prison for killing his own son to silence the disgusting proof of his darkest secrets. Joey Gatos Jr., the child actor who played Zach Mooneyham in School of Rock, was arrested in Florida in 2019 after allegedly stealing multiple guitars and amplifiers from local music stores. Authorities said he'd enter shops, test out pricey instruments like a professional, then simply walk out the door with them before pawning them off for quick cash. The spree reportedly lasted several weeks before he was caught, and police suggested the thefts were connected to struggles with substance abuse. Once celebrated for his guitar skills on screen, Gatos' real-life downfall was a far cry from the rock star dream that made him famous. In 1926, jazz legend Fats Waller was leaving a Chicago nightclub when four armed men suddenly grabbed him, threw him into a car, and drove off. Initially terrified, Waller soon realized he wasn't being robbed. He was being delivered as a surprise birthday gift to none other than mob boss Al Capone. Forced to play piano at Capone's private party, Waller ended up performing for 3 straight days, while dozens of gangsters cheered, drank, and shoved cash into his pockets. When it was finally all over, Waller stumbled out of the mansion completely drunk, covered in sweat, and stuffed with thousands of dollars in tips. Despite the bizarre ordeal, Waller reportedly laughed it off afterwards, saying it was the best paying gig he ever had by far. In 2024 in Los Angeles, California, 23-year-old YouTuber Tumad, whose real name was Medea Sadiq, was found dead inside his home after a welfare check was requested when he'd gone silent for several days. Authorities discovered his body in a state of decomposition, indicating he had likely been dead for some time before anyone realized. The death was later linked to a suspected drug overdose, with reports of substances found at the scene. In the months leading up to his death, Tumad had posted increasingly erratic and concerning content online, including references to drug use and disturbing behavior. Despite having millions of followers and a massive online presence, he died alone unnoticed until the smell coming from his residence prompted concern. Donald Miller disappeared in Ohio in 1986 to escape debt and alcoholism, and was declared legally dead in 1994 so his ex-wife could collect Social Security benefits for their children. Years later, he resurfaced and appeared in court in 2013 asking to be declared alive again. The judge ruled that under Ohio law, a death declaration cannot be reversed after 3 years, meaning that despite standing in the courtroom alive, Miller was legally considered dead. As a result, he was left unable to get a driver's license, Social Security number, or legally work, effectively existing outside the system with no clear way to reverse his status. In December of 2019, Anthony Topp murdered his wife Megan and their 3 young children along with the family dog inside their home in Celebration, Florida. Autopsies showed the victims were restrained, beaten, and suffocated, with evidence indicating the children were killed first. Topp then remained in the house for weeks as the bodies decomposed, sleeping nearby and conducting normal activities while masking the smells with air fresheners. When police entered the home a few weeks later, they found all 5 bodies in various stages of decomposition. Topp later admitted responsibility, though he gave conflicting accounts and attempted to blame his wife. In 2023, he was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and animal cruelty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. In February of 2022, 25-year-old Taylor Shabiznis killed her boyfriend in one of Wisconsin's most horrific crimes in modern history. During sex in the basement of his mother's home, she strangled 24-year-old Shad Therian to death after a night of heavy drug use. But what she did next was beyond comprehension. She continued to violate his body for hours, then used knives and a chainsaw to slice him apart, deliberately placing his severed head in a bucket and leaving it in plain view for his mother to find the next morning. When the woman went downstairs, she came face to face with the unimaginable, her son's head staring back at her from inside a blood-filled bucket. Shabiznis later told police they'd have fun trying to find the rest of him. And her violent behavior didn't end there. During a 2023 court hearing, she suddenly lunged at her own attorney, knocking him to the ground before being restrained by deputies. Shabiznis was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without parole. On October 19, 2025, 18-year-old Kimber Mills was celebrating with friends at a bonfire in Alabama when 27-year-old Steven Tyler Whitehead showed up uninvited, a stranger to nearly everyone there. Witnesses say he began harassing people at the party before pulling out a gun and firing into the crowd. Kimber, who had never even met the man, was struck in the head and leg. Her friend Silas McKay, who intervened and tried to protect her, was shot several times but survived after multiple emergency surgeries. Kimber was rushed to UAB Hospital in critical condition, but her brain injuries proved irreversible. As her family made the heartbreaking decision to remove her from life support, hundreds of classmates, teachers, and nurses lined the halls for her honor walk, a silent tribute to a girl whose compassion lived on through others. Her heart went to a 7-year-old boy and her lungs to another patient in need, an ending that reflected the kindness she'd hoped to share as a future nurse. Whitehead has been charged with murder and multiple counts of attempted murder, but has yet to fully explain why he opened fire that night, leaving a community completely shattered by his senseless act of violence. In 2022, 39-year-old Stephen Dierkes was working at Caterpillar's foundry in Illinois when he suddenly slipped and fell into a large vat of molten iron heated to 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The human body has zero chance at that temperature as he was vaporized instantly. A coworker said part of his body was still on the platform while the rest of it melted like candle wax. OSHA later found several severe safety violations, but nothing could undo one of the most horrific workplace deaths in history. Kazuko Fukuda, dubbed the Woman of Seven Faces, strangled a coworker in 1982 and disappeared, launching one of Japan's longest manhunts in history. But instead of hiding, she reinvented herself over and over, using fake identities, constant moves, and even plastic surgery to change her face. She stayed free for nearly 15 years, long enough that Japan's statute of limitations on murder was about to expire. But just months before time ran out, a diner owner recognized her from a TV show, and police confirmed her identity using fingerprints on a beer bottle. She was finally sentenced to life in 1999, but died in prison just 6 years later. On November 13, 1982, Duck Koo Kim fought Ray Mancini for the WBA lightweight title in Las Vegas. In the 14th round, Kim was knocked down hard and the fight was stopped. Minutes later, he collapsed from a massive brain hemorrhage, fell into a coma, and died 4 days later at age 27. Then, just a couple months later, in early 1983, Kim's mother died by suicide after traveling to the US and struggling with her son's death. Just a few months after that, referee Richard Green also took his own life after reportedly falling into severe depression, overwhelmed by guilt and public blame for not stopping the fight sooner. The bout became one of the darkest moments in boxing history and directly led to major safety reforms and the elimination of 15-round title fights. In 1977, unemployed Indiana man Tony Karitzis kidnapped mortgage banker Richard Hall after blaming him for the foreclosure of his home. Tony strapped a sawed-off shotgun to Richard's neck, rigged with a dead man trigger so any sudden movement could fire it, and held him hostage inside the Meridian Mortgage Company for nearly 3 days. During the standoff, Richard was forced to walk outside in public and even stand through a live press conference with the gun still pressed against his neck. With negotiations failing and Richard's life constantly at risk, police ended the siege by shooting Tony through a window, killing him instantly as Richard survived unharmed. This man is exactly why you should always lock your doors no matter what. Richard Chase, known as the Vampire of Sacramento, was a severely schizophrenic serial killer who believed his blood was drying up since he couldn't get his schlong up. In his twisted mind, the only cure was to drink blood and consume organs to restore himself. He started with wild animals, blending their organs with soda, but in 1977 he escalated, murdering 6 people within a month. He had one horrifying rule: if a door was locked, he walked away, but if it was unlocked, he took it as an invitation from God to enter. Once inside, Chase committed violent crimes so graphic even veteran detectives vomited. He shot his victims, drank their blood straight from the wounds, disemboweled them, cannibalized body parts, and even stuffed animal feces into their mouths. In one case, he decapitated a 22-month-old baby and blended the organs into a drink. Police later found a blender filled with human organs mixed with orange juice, a human smoothie he kept in his fridge like groceries. While in court, he showed zero remorse, insisting that he had to kill or else he would die. Sentenced to death by gas chamber in 1979, even other death row inmates were terrified of him and begged guards to keep him away. But before the state could execute him, Chase overdosed on hoarded antidepressants in his cell and died at the young age of 30. In 2018, Richard Bebo Russell, a 28-year-old Horizon Air ground agent, stunned the aviation world when he quietly climbed into a Bombardier Q400 at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, started the engines from knowledge he'd picked up from YouTube and flight simulators, and took off without a license or clearance. For nearly an hour, he flew over Puget Sound, chatting calmly with air traffic control, admitting he was a broken guy while performing a full barrel roll in a 76-seat passenger plane. F-15 fighter jets scrambled to intercept him, but he refused to land, steering the aircraft away from cities before deliberately crashing it into the woods of Ketron Island. The explosion killed only him, scorched acres of forest, and exposed a massive security gap at the airport. In 2014, 43-year-old Chad Olson was reportedly texting his babysitter during movie previews when the man behind him, 71-year-old retired police captain Curtis Reeves, told him to put the phone away. The argument escalated. Olson tossed a handful of popcorn in frustration, and Reeves instantly responded by pulling a handgun and shooting him in the chest. Olson died later that day, while his wife was also injured while trying to block the shot with her hand. Despite witnesses saying Olson never got physical beyond the popcorn, a jury ultimately acquitted Reeves in 2022, accepting his claim that he fired in self-defense under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. 17-year-old Louisiana girl Caitlin Strait was 28 weeks pregnant when a road rage incident suddenly ended her life. She was shot in the head, declared brain dead, and doctors had to perform an emergency C-section to save her baby. She and her friends were simply driving when another vehicle pulled up and opened fire. Even worse, police said they had no idea why the shooter even targeted them. There was no crash, no argument, no warning. The teen was rushed to the hospital, but her injuries were irreversible, and she was kept alive just long enough to deliver her premature baby. To this day, the killer has never been found, and the motive remains a mystery.